It's the same thing as I see kids now that are applying for college, and I say, well, how many schools did you apply to? Well, just one. What if you get turned down? Well, I'm not going to get turned down. And they end up having to go to junior college to get into the school. So that's, there are going to be qualifications, and you've got to be fair. And we have a population of people that you just have to be honest about it. We have oppressed a significant part of the population, and you've got to make a break somewhere.
Maybe it creates contention too amongst people if you know that there's a system that might favor a Hispanic woman over a white male. Then does that make that white male more resentful of that Hispanic woman, or a black or a white person? It could make you more resentful, even if just thinking that they get an advantage. It would create resentment.
Looked like you had something to say back there.
We passed the civil rights legislation where it was sometime in the 60s, and that was legislation that certainly needed to be passed, and I was all for it. And there was a lot of obstacles to overcome with that legislation, but that's been, going on 50 years ago when we passed that legislation. And I think at some point, you've just got to say you've got to compete as an equal. And if you're a black kid and you're applying for law school or med school, and you're a white kid and you're applying for med school and law school, you're going to get it based on your merits, not because you're black or maybe because you're white. And I think we just need, at some point in our culture, get past this, giving special rights to certain groups. And just hopefully we've grown past all of that.
Let me ask from this point of view then, is there a benefit though to making sure we seem to be focusing on schools even though affirmative action is much bigger than just schools, but
Right.
isn't there a benefit to having that mix of race and minorities in a school? Isn't that part of the benefit of a university, is to expose all of us to these things? And if in fact, not saying that it's true, but if the majority of white students will have better test scores than other minorities, isn't this kind of levering it so those white students get a much more diverse experience out of college? So isn't there a good thing to be bringing these groups together who might not be together?
Yes. Sure. There's good and bad. That's what makes it confusing and hard to figure out. That's why we can't all just decide right here with you, Ernie, what we should do about it.
Well, the other thing we need to take into account, and a lot of times people who tell these negative affirmative action stories are simply using test scores as a basis. Two things are true. Not all people, not all learning styles score well on that particular kind of test. The SAT was originally calibrated for 100 white freshmen at Stanford. And if you answered like they did, you scored well. If you did not score well. The predictive value of first-year performance in either graduate school or undergraduate school differs greatly by gender and by ethnicity. The predictive value of a certain score. So test scores themselves are not an accurate measure of many people's performance. Now, I was one of the lucky ones. I scored really high, and people had much greater expectations from me than I did. My wife scored 830 on the SAT when the minimum was 800. Not only did she make better grades than I did, she had a much easier time of learning languages than I did. But if you believe only her test scores, she had no place in college. Not true at all.
I had the same exact experience with my son and daughter. My son's attitude was that 90 was an A. Her attitude was that, no, 100 is not an A. and she has 2 masters, and he did finish his college, but and she had in the 800s, and he was in the 1500s. He was way up there. And I said, well, how'd you do that? And he says, well, I could look at a math problem. If there are 3 answers, I could say 2 of them aren't right. He could just look at them. So I work out as a volunteer at the University of Houston, and I see the diversity in the community out there. That's our hope for the future. It blows my mind. It is not the world that I grew up in. In other words, if you look at the Interfraternity Council at the University of Houston, and you look at the Interfraternity Council that I participated in at the University of Texas, they aren't the same thing. The kids at the University of Houston, they're not having this problem. They just don't. The diversity is just amazing. It's uplifting.
Okay, back row's talking. What do you say?
Okay.
Huh?
What did you just say?
I said education, education, education.
That helps.
They're at the University of Houston. They're getting an education.
They got an education in order to get to the University of Houston.
And I'm just saying, a lot of the problem, and education goes back to where you are on the social economic scale, too. I mean, it's a backbone that some people choose to ignore.
Are we missing the whole point of this conversation, talking about black and white? Should we be talking about poor and wealthy?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's actually a more meaningful question. And I think as our society moves through the next 100 years, that will become the defining issue. Much more important than skin color, ethnicity, language you speak at home, or anything.
We're talking about affirmative action. I just want to do the flip side of that for a minute and say, well, what does white privilege exist, and what does that mean?
Say it again.
White privilege. Does that exist, and what does that mean? Is there a bias toward giving a leg up to somebody who's white, because we're mostly a white society. We tend to come together with our own.
If you look at the population, we are not in the Houston area a mostly white population. We are not the majority. We are not mostly white.
So you can imagine.
No, I think that I agree with Lee that we are not the majority any longer, and I think much of the problem with that question about white privilege has been played up in the media, and it's like make it a thing, and it's not as much, as some people would have us believe, especially not out here in the suburbs. I don't think it has much relevance out here.
Would we know?
Yeah. Would we know? How would we know? How would we know? Yeah.
Well, I think the answer to this phenomenon, which is called white privilege, is actually perceived expectations. Your expectations of me may or may not be different because I'm an old fat white guy. But I guarantee you that when I walk into the credit union, the security guard's expectations of me are different than they are a black guy in a hoodie. If that's white privilege, I don't know. But I think that's what it is. And I think people react to me as what I am. And I think they react differently to other people. I know that they react differently to my wife. And I have a grandson in California who is half black and probably half Hispanic. And when he and I go places together, things get really different. He's 10. He can tell the difference.
See, I think, following up on what Bill is saying, that I look at people not by their skin color, but there are certain people I admit I've got prejudices against. And for example, if you got a gang-looking kid with tattoos everywhere and his head shaved off, I'm going to be probably wary of him, and he's not going to be my best friend. But it doesn't matter whether he's black or white. Same thing if I see a black kid with his pants down to his knees and a hoodie on and not looking like he's a gang type, I don't want to be his friend either. And I think it's more of who they are, not what their ethnic background is.
But there's an interesting thing that I've seen happen. So over the past 2 years, I've been working as the manager of our resale shop here at the church. We are an agency that takes community service workers from Harris County. So these are people who've been convicted of something, and they've been asked as part of their restitution to do service for their community. So they come to us as a church nonprofit to do those hours. They're expected to dress in a certain way when they come, comfortable but respectful, pants around your waist, regular shirt, not tank tops, not shorts, the way you would expect to be casual but semi-professional. They come that way. They say yes ma'am and no ma'am, and they say please and thank you, and they are polite. I've never had an experience that wasn't that way. Obviously they've done something disrespectful to someone somewhere. But in the environment that they're in, they behave the way they're expected to behave. So at some point, somewhere in their life, they didn't feel that expectation. They did something that was disrespectful, perhaps violent, perhaps just a bad choice. But that's the same person standing right in front of me, being very respectful, joking with me, telling me what happened in their day, being my friend. So I think that maybe the expectation is what changed and not that person.
Are you speaking about minorities, white people?
All different ethnicities, Hispanics, black people, white people. I don't know their economic circumstances, but I can certainly see their ethnicity, and it's all different. Black people with tattoos all over them, white people with tattoos all over them, people with no tattoos, blonde hair, blue eyes, whatever. There is an expectation, and they all meet it equally.
A quick, just curious question, and I don't mean, when I use the word fat, I don't mean any of us who have had a few extra pounds. But if you could wake up tomorrow either very heavy or black and stay that way the rest of your life, which would you choose?
Oh, that's easy. Black.
You would choose black.
I have never even considered that.
I'm asking you to consider it now.
I'd probably choose black.
Well, my heart doctor would say I need to choose black.
Exactly.
How heavy is the
Choose
black
Clyde.
person?
I like you. Oh yeah, can I be really skinny?
Yeah, be a thin black person. Look, that was an outside question. I was curious.
No, but if you're overweight, you have health